We're going to look at 7 shocking verses you don't often hear in church. It's a list I pulled off of BuzzFeed a few years ago. And even though that website is full of raging pagans, this particular list had some really odd stuff on it that, like, if you may have read past it in the Bible before. I mean, maybe you scratched your head, or maybe you totally missed it because your brother started talking to you, or your phone went off with 17 notifications. But there's some fun stuff in there that would be kind of good for us to unpack, because it is the kind of stuff that raging pagans like our BuzzFeed friends like to pull out to talk about how wacko Christians are. So, tonight we're going to have a little bit of fun exploring some really weird stuff in the Bible. You with me? Yes. Awesome. Look at that. People talking. All right, so the first one, Psalm 137:9. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rock. That's nice, right? So, kind of a loose translation of that is murdering babies is a good time. Right? So, some of you are like, that's not in the Bible, right? That's a Photoshop error, and yet it's not. And yet, no. All right, so here it is. So on its own, this verse does seem pretty horrific, right? In the modern world, nobody wants to go out and take a baby and smash it against a rock. Now, with that in mind, let's unpack this a little. We're going to read the entire psalm. That's not scary. It's not super long, but that's going to give us the context we need to even try to understand this. Psalm 137. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. That's Jerusalem. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, not the people whose pants are on fire, but the little stringed instruments. For there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare, down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall be he who repays with what you have done to us. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. Ooh, we're going to come back to that. All right. So it does sound awful. Here's what's going on. Psalm 137 is written while the Israelites are in exile. They've been conquered by a foreign power. They've been hauled out of their country. God is using the country of Babylon to punish them. This is all kind of stuff we're vaguely familiar with. Their temple has been destroyed. That's a big deal because before Jesus came, that was the only place they could worship God correctly. They're being mocked by their neighbors who are kind of like distant cousins. Edom is the descendants of Ishmael, right? Abraham's first and somewhat illegitimate son. That's a fun other story. So they're being mocked by their neighbors for God's failure to protect them. So this psalm is something called a communal lament, which is like something the whole country would sing together when they were sad. And here is a 25-cent word for you. It is an imprecatory psalm. Now that's something we all used in school today, right? Your teacher talked about the imprecatory essay on the grapes of wrath? No? Okay, so imprecatory is a big fancy word for people who sit too much time in their office. That means that it's calling down a curse from God. So they're so angry, they're so hurt, they're so upset by what's happened that they're asking God to punish their enemies. And they kind of have a right to, because even though God sent Babylon to punish them, Babylon kind of took the assignment and went A double plus with it. They didn't just conquer Israel. They raped, pillaged, and murdered Israel. They didn't just tear down the temple. They burned it down, took all the gold from in between the bricks, and hauled it off. They didn't just, come in and take the livestock. They came in and took the livestock and then took the bones from the livestock and dumped them all over the Israeli dead. So Babylon went a little bit farther than God had wanted, and Israel's really unhappy about being exiled anyway. And so that's where we get to this really weird verse where they say, blessed be he who takes your little ones and dashes them against a rock. So far you're saying, yeah, still I haven't heard anything that makes this okay. And you are correct. So, here's what happens when Babylon comes to town. First, they surround your city, and they say mean things to you, right? Now, what they've done in that process is cut you off from all food and water. And so this is siege warfare. Some of you have learned about this in medieval world history. Only in the Middle Ages it was slightly more humane than back when Babylon was doing it. So they eventually would build a ramp up, get on the walls, knock the walls down, come in, and they wouldn't just burn your town down. Don't worry. They would also stab your women in the stomachs, rip their stomachs open, and then toss them over a ledge. So after Babylon had killed all of Israel's babies, we pick up to verse 8. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you for what you have done to us. Blessed is he who takes your little ones and dashes them against a rock. So here's the deal. The Bible is not saying, go to Walmart, snatch a baby out of a stroller, bash them on the curb. That is not what's happening. What is happening is, that would be wrong, yes. We can talk about that later. What is happening here is God is hearing the emotions of his people who want payback for what was done to them. If you follow history, God did not send a wave of Israelites to go kill all the Babylonian babies, right? This is kind of like when your, sister throws something into your TV and breaks it, and you yell and scream horrible things at her, but you don't follow through a month later. Like, it's just emotion, raw emotion, not actually a desire to go and kill babies. Super weird, not the way our world works, but that's what's going on. So the good news is that we have Jesus, and we don't have to go kill animals and babies to have things made right. So we're treating everything kind of quickly, but we do have an Ask Anything night next week. So if you feel like you need more detail on baby murdering, we can talk about it next week. 1 Timothy 2:12, I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She is to keep silent. Ah, yes, the theme verse of 2020. The world reads, woman, make me a sandwich. That is not what 2 Timothy is saying. All right? This one has stirred the pot for decades. We live in a culture where rightly women are trying to be treated fairly because they are equal, and this seems very weird. It seems like some sort of sexist relic of a misogynistic past we should chuck out the window before we catch a disease. But here's what's really happening. Okay, let's read the whole passage. I desire, this is Paul talking to Timothy. Timothy is a church pastor not much older than the seniors in this room. Paul's sending him a letter and saying, I desire that in every place, meaning all the places there are churches, the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Real quick, what does that mean the men are doing? They're being angry and quarreling, right? This is bad. Likewise, also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works. If we take all of that and condense out all the details, what Paul is saying, women should be known for their character, not for the caricature they put on the outside. Is jewelry wrong? No. Is fancy braided hair wrong? No. Do pearls make you a sinner? No. What he's saying is you should be known for your character, not for those things. Right? We're going to keep going. Verse 11. Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. That seems awful. We'll come back to that. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she's to remain quiet. We're still going to come back to that. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Yet she will be saved through childbearing, super weird, if they continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control. Now, I could spend like a whole month on this because there's so much weirdness. First off, half the room is thinking, I'm not a baby machine. That is correct. Some of you are thinking, well, what about women who can't have children? You are correct. Some of you are like the quietest person in the room. That's fine. Some of you are the loudest person in the room. That's fine. Some of you are male in the room. Also fine. Here's what's going on. Because for the sake of time, we're not going to keep reading the whole book. But here's what's happening. He starts in verse 8, telling the men what to do. I desire that in every place men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. So first off, the men be messing up. And he's trying to get all of that under control. Then he lists off some things that he wishes the women weren't doing. And here's the essence of what he's saying. Men, don't distract by being angry and fighting. Women, don't distract by drawing attention to your outside. The crux of the problem is not that women are somehow inferior. The problem is that the women in Timothy's church were drawing attention to themselves instead of to Jesus. Right? So and just like the men were too. So he's trying to focus all that. So this doesn't mean that women should go mute the instant they walk on church property. Huzzah. Because there are references in the rest of Paul's writing to women praying in church. In 1 Corinthians, Acts 18, Priscilla and Aquila are teaching Apollos. There's women who are leading other men to Christ. In Titus, 2 chapters over, women are teaching other women and children. Women are actively involved in the church, talking in the church, praying in the church, teaching in the church, doing things in the church. So, how do we put all these things together? Because the Bible doesn't contradict itself, even though sometimes it confuses us. Because it does sound like I'm kind of stepping over myself. So, he says that, word for word, women are not to teach or exercise authority over man. Here's what those words, teach and exercise authority, mean when you read the whole book. What he's saying is he doesn't think that women should be senior pastors, is Baptist terminology. And he's going to go into that in the next chapter. He's also saying that most men shouldn't be senior pastors. There's this whole list of things in the next chapter that most men can't handle getting right. We always skip those parts because they're not as exciting and they don't slap us in the face as much. But he tells most men that they're not qualified either. So, the passage isn't forbidding women speaking or even teaching in church, but it does seem to say that women are not supposed to be senior pastors. It does not say, thou shalt make me a sandwich. I understand that because of my limited time, this is an unsatisfactory answer to some of you, and I'm happy to continue unpacking it at a later time. But there's some other good stuff in here that we want to get to, so forgive my haste. Jeremiah 19:9, and I will make them eat the flesh of their sons and the flesh of their daughters, and shall eat the flesh of their neighbors in the siege and in the distress with which their enemies and those who seek their life afflict them. Well, that sounds fun. Pizza or thigh? The world reads, you were disobedient, so God will make you eat your own kids. False. All right, so we talked about that whole siege warfare thing. Jeremiah is a prophet who's preaching to Judah before Babylon takes them, but after Assyria has taken Israel. And he's saying that Babylon's going to come, and they're going to surround the town, and they are going to be conquered. And he's saying the siege is so bad that they are going to resort to cannibalism. And the reason they are being sieged is because of their sin, which sounds like I'm saying the same thing. But here's the deal. We don't have time to read all the way through this, but you can go back and read it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Go and double check it. But what's happening is he's saying in advance, because of the sin, because I'm kicking you out of the land, because of the way you're going to get kicked out of the land, you're going to be locked up in your city for so long that you are going to resort to eating each other. That doesn't mean that God wants them to. He's just telling them what's going to happen. There's a lot of times in the Bible that it describes things that happened that God didn't like. That's most of the Bible, because we always tend to do things that God doesn't like. And so he's describing what's going to happen. This is part of an oracle of judgment. If you disobey God long enough, you're not going to be located inside your home again and have to eat your little brother for dinner sometime in March. I know after 9 months of random levels of lockdown and quarantine, it kind of seems like that's happening, but Judah was this remnant of the people of God, and their sin gets them kicked out, and they're supposed to be this witness to the world, so God's just warning them in advance of what their punishment is going to be, so that when it happens, they look back at what he already said, and it shows them how good he is, just in the fact of the ones who survive. So, I know, still complicated. We're going to keep moving forward. 1 Peter. Wow, I went backwards too many times. It was predicted in Deuteronomy as well. That's what those slides are that we don't have time for. 1 Peter 2:18. Slaves, accept the authority of your masters with all deference, not only those who are kind and gentle, but also those who are harsh. For it is to your credit if being aware of God, you endure pain while suffering unjustly. Well, that's fun. That sounds something like slavery rocks, which is kind of funny because in Egypt they had to pull rocks. But that is not what God is saying. Slavery has always been an evil thing, and for some reason it has been around for a very, very, very long time. It's still going on right now, by the way. I know we think that it's all done because in America it's done, but it's not done. Slavery is still part of the world. Only now, instead of using slaves to pick fields, it's normally for the sex trade. So, slavery is still a thing, and it's evil. When Peter writes this, it's about the year 64. So Jesus has been gone for about 30 years. Effectively, everybody in the church at this point, in the whole world, everybody who's heard of what Jesus did is a Roman citizen, is part of the Roman Empire. Somewhere in the neighborhood, lots of people say lots of different things. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 25% of the Roman Empire was slaves. So even though you can't really do this with statistics, that means somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% of every church was slaves. So even though slavery was wrong, God is addressing something that's actually happening, because there are people meeting in these house churches every Sunday that are slaves, and they need to know what to do. So what he's basically saying is when you submit to the government, you are being a good witness. Submit to your master as an authority that God has put over you, verse 18 says. When we look at the whole passage, be subject to the Lord, say to every human institution, whether it is to the emperor as supreme or the governor as sent by him, for this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. God's not okaying slavery. In fact, his way of undermining slavery was by transforming hearts and the church growing, and the church is what has been overturning slavery in every part of the world. Sometimes not as quickly as it should. But he is telling people who are slaves how to be a slave, because they are slaves, and he's not sending an angel to come and kill all slave owners. And before we all think, well, he should have done that. Well, maybe. He should also kill us for all of our sin too, but he doesn't, so I'm thankful. Suffering justly is fair, like when we mess up and get a punishment. Suffering unjustly makes us like Christ. Christ also suffered unjustly, so kind of when we sum this up, he's not condemning or promoting it. He just knows it's happening, and they wanted people to know how to act. So here's how we apply this principle, because most likely no one in this room will be enslaved. Most likely. We are supposed to be submissive to our employers and other authorities, whether they're good to us or not. Some of you already have jobs. Some of you have already had that boss. We don't get to go on a crusade in our office of gossip and evil and undermining and putting staplers in Jell-O of our evil boss. Nice office reference, I know. So we are supposed to submit, even when they're evil, to show how good God is. Is that always fun? No. I had a pastor several churches ago who lied in the pulpit, and I had to figure out how I handle that. Knowingly lied unrepentantly in the pulpit. 2 services in a row. What do you do with that? And that's in a church. So even though I've never been enslaved, praise God, I still have to treat my employer the way this passage tells a slave to submit to their master. I know it's complicated. I know some of you think I'm not spending enough time on this, but we've got some other good verses to hit in 7 minutes. All right, Leviticus 18:22 reads, eventually, see how much stuff I'm cutting out? You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is a sin and abomination. Leviticus 18:22. The world reads, being gay is punishable by death. Well, that's a good message in 2020, isn't it? That's also not actually what this is saying. So Leviticus 18 is this interesting chapter in the Bible. I don't know, this is not the chapter to go read on a day that you're just casually bored or sitting in class, because it's just a list of things not to have sex with. And you think I'm making that up, but no, not right now. Not right now. Well, I'm not sure which part of the not was confusing, but we'll have a conversation about that later. So, here's the deal. We're gonna take a second and read in context. And the Lord, well, sort of. We're going to cut out some of the context. because it's just a list of things not to sleep with. Exodus 18:18, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 1, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt where you lived. You shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan to which I'm bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. You shall follow my rules and keep my statutes and walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my rules. If a person does them, he shall live by them. I am the Lord. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. You shall not lie with any animal, and so make yourself unclean. We'll just keep going. Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, for by all these the nation I am driving you out have become unclean, and the land became unclean, so that I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. So here's how we balance this out, friends, quickly, because I know this really deserves more time than I can give it. God is giving this code of holiness to Israel, because Israel's going to be the missionaries to the nations, or they're supposed to be, then they kind of do their own thing. So this is part of this law, this long, boring book of the law. There's like endless chapters of how you specifically kill a goat for this specific sin before we get to this. Which, by the way, makes us really grateful that we have Jesus and we're not killing a goat right now. Rachel's really glad we're not killing goats. So, but his whole point here is he's setting them apart to be a good example. And he's also telling them, don't do the things that got these other people kicked out of the land. And some of those things are this long list. The reason that God does not like this thing is because it is the opposite of how he created things to be. So when you do something that is purposely different than what God created, he's not going to be happy. And his standards are perfect and ours aren't. Now, some of you are rightly thinking that this kind of thing is in the same list in the rest of the Bible as things like gossiping and lying and being angry at your parents. And that is correct, which are also punishable by death in the Old Testament. If you hit your parent, like you, teenager, like 2,000 years ago in Israel, if you hit your parent, you could be stoned to death. If your parents walked in on some of the things that happen on date nights at the drive-in, you could be stoned to death. Sorry, real talk with Greg. If ladies, you hit a gentleman in a not gentlemanly area, you could have your hand cut off. If gentlemen, you mistreat a lady, you could have your head cut off. So, here's where I'm going with this. I want you to hear me. This is why context is always so important. Stick with me, Andrew. This is why context is always so important. There's a long list of things in the Old Testament, pretty much everything, that could end with you being stoned by rocks. This is not the only sin. This is not the only sin that was punishable by death. And this is a sin that is forgivable by Christ. So the misunderstanding is people like to go and pick out the one thing that they want to be okay and be like, haha, God hates. No, God hates all of it. God hates all of it. And Jesus is bigger than all of it. And that's good, because everyone in this room has lied, and everyone in this room has gossiped, and everyone in this room has spoken badly to their parents, and everybody in this room has mistreated either a brother or a sister or a friend. Everybody in this room has done most of the things on that list. So we're all worthy of being stoned. This isn't like some subset of people that could be stoned. It's all of us. So, as depressing as that is, let's move on to nudity. All right. Mark 14:51. A certain young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body, and they seized him, but he left with linen cloth and ran away naked. So what the world hears is there was a secret naked disciple in addition to the usual 12. Not even a twisty treat in sight. So, here's the deal. You can read this story at the end of Mark chapter 14. This is at the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is with the disciples. Judas brings the mob to arrest Jesus. A sword comes out, an ear gets cut off. People are running in every direction. And this guy, who many people believe was Mark, who wrote the Gospel of Mark with Peter, believe that when they were trying to capture Mark, he was so terrified that he just ran away. His clothes got torn off, and he just kept going. And that's a big deal, because linen was super expensive. I know now it's just your mom's tablecloth, but in a desert climate, this was like the fabric that kept you from sweating. It was high style. And so not only did he lose his status symbol, but he lost his status because he was running through the woods naked. He's that crazy guy from Birdemic. That's a different story. All right. So he's not some secret disciple. It's just a weird thing that we normally read right past because it's only one verse. So he's, well, yeah, there's really no good application there. Leave your clothes on. All right. And then we come to what might be my favorite scene in the entire Bible. I love this so much. 2 Kings 2:23, he went up from there to Bethel, and while he was going up on the way, some small boys came to him and said, out of the city and jeered at him, saying, "Go up, you bald head! Go up, you bald head!" And he turned around, and when he saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord, and 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the boys. So the world reads, bear attack in the Bible on kids. Having spent a decent amount of time in Alaska, this one hits home with me. No, not that far north. So here's the deal. We don't have a lot of time to unpack this. Elisha, who's this prophet who does all kinds of interesting miracles, has just watched Elijah be taken up on chariots, on a chariot of fire with horses of fire up into the air. Elisha becomes his successor. Elisha takes a piece of cloth, whacks the Jordan River, the river splits, Elisha walks across, the river closes back behind him, and all these other prophets are like, hey, we bet you're the new Elijah, but we really like Elijah better, so can we go and look for him? Read 2 Kings, it's kind of crazy. And he's like, no, he's gone. And they're like, no, we really want to look for him. All right, go. So they spend 3 days looking for Elijah, and they come back. And that's everything that's been going on. So finally, they figure out Elijah's not coming back. And so Elisha is moving up on his way. He's going to Bethel, which means house of God, but it's just this little town. And while he's going up, some small boys came out of the city and start mocking him. Now, here's the one of two problems. One, they're mocking God's prophet. Now, that doesn't mean like on Sunday morning, if you don't like Pastor Brian's sermon, like a gator's going to come out of the wings and take you out, right? But there was a big deal in that Elisha was God's mouthpiece on earth, and these kids are mocking him. But also, there were 42 of them. This is like Lord of the Flies. Have you been around 42 children? It's terrifying. Yeah. So like these 42 boys, they're probably throwing things at him because that's a thing boys do. I walk 2 to school every morning, and somehow just in 2, things are thrown at each other in the 10-minute walk to Walden Lake Elementary. I can imagine what 42 people who are insulting this guy are doing. We don't know what he said. Maybe he's just like, get out of here, kids. You're messing up my lawn. Or maybe he was like, God send a bear. But whatever he said, out come these 2 she-bears and kill the children. What's almost better is like these bears come out, they attack 42 children, and Elisha just goes on his way like it's a normal day. Normal Tuesday, right? Let's go get some Sonic. I need a slushie. So, maybe not cherry. So here's the deal. There are incidents in the Bible that show us God has power to harm as well as heal. Nice. That happened to me at a church service in North Carolina. These rare moments where God chooses to show someone punishment instead of mercy remind us how great it is when we get mercy. So the Bible is the story of God's glory. It's all about God. He's the central character. We're kind of side pieces. And it is the rule for our faith and practice. It's this wealth of knowledge, but it's also It's a treasure trove of really weird things where if we'll take more than 30 seconds to kind of think through and read through and figure out what's going on, we can understand that she-bears and babies and rocks and slavery and women somehow all works together in a way that points to God and provides our best, even when the world doesn't always understand us. But at least it does give us something to talk about in a day and age where people don't really like to talk. So, well, yeah. We're going to pray, and then I've got a couple of reminders. So, Jesus, we thank you that because of you, we don't have to be dashed on a rock, and we don't have to be mauled by a bear, and we don't have to stay silent, and we don't have to be stoned, and we don't have to have all of these horrible things happen because of the work that you did on our behalf. Thank you for loving us when we were unlovable, and help us to trust you when you seem to be untrustable. It's in your name we pray. Amen.